has held the oceans in his hands? Who has numbered every grain of sand? Kings and nations tremble at his voice. All creation rises to rejoice. Who has given counsel to the Lord? Who can question any of his words? Who can teach the one who knows all things? Who can fathom all his wondrous deeds? Behold, our God, seated on his throne. Come, let us adore him. Behold, our King, nothing can compare. Come, let us adore him. Who has felt the nails upon his hands, bearing all the guilt of sinful man? God eternal trembled to the grave. Jesus Savior risen now to reign. Behold, our God, seated on his throne. Come, let us adore him. Behold, our King, nothing can compare. Come, let us adore him. Behold, our God, seated on his throne. Come, let us adore him. Behold, our King, nothing can compare. Come, let us adore him.
Thank you very much, Mervyn. You'll notice Mervyn is leaving the watch there. Well, at least I have it anyway. Thanks, Mervyn, for the words of welcome. Thank you, Daniel, for your part as well, for a little bit of your story and singing to us. And as always, it's just great to be with you here in Foe this morning. We really lifted the roof on that first song, didn't we? It's a little while since I've been in a service where I've just sensed singing like that. It was just super. And it's great to have a little bit of freedom again, isn't it? And to be back in God's house and to worship him, because he is worthy of all the praise we can give him. Nehemiah chapter 1, we're going to take a little look at that. And while you're looking that up, I'll just shout out a few of the singers, I suppose, at the evening drive-ins. On tonight, the Maben family, I think the Maben family were singing for you last Sunday here. They're singing tonight on the truck. They are just so enjoyable. If you can coax somebody to get along to hear them, that would be good. Then your own Coulter is singing on Monday night for us, and then some of ourselves are doing bits and singing midweek, so to speak. Then Friday night is the whole night is being ran by young people. There's young people just doing the whole Friday night. So if you can encourage young folks to get out for that. These are the evening drive-ins now I'm referring to. And then Sunday night, the closing night, we have the Ballybray Country Gospel Group, if that's what I'm calling them right. They are thoroughly enjoyable. And if you can coax folks along for that night to the drive-in, we'd encourage you to do so as well. So that's just a little bit of the lineup. I had one of these. Mervyn was waving it at you as well. I brought in more and left them there on your way out. Can I re-echo? Take some of them, pass them on, and just give folks a little nudge, and perhaps they will come along to the events. So Nehemiah chapter 1. Nehemiah, is that the time, Mervyn? My goodness. Hopefully you have a timer on the oven, have you? Anyway, no, we'll try and... Nehemiah chapter 1. Let's just read through the chapter. Nehemiah is an amazing character, and this book is worthy of our attention in the days in which we find ourselves. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. It came to pass in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan, the citadel, that Hananiah, one of my brethren, came with men from Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped, who had survived the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, the survivors who are left from the captivity in the province are there in great distress and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is also broken down, and its gates are burned with fire. What a picture. So it was when I heard these words that I sat down and wept and mourned for many days. I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. And I said, I pray, Lord God of heaven, O great and awesome God. That's an American word, isn't it? Awesome for an American, friends. You who keep your covenant and mercy with those who love you and observe your commandments. Please let your ear be attentive and your eyes open, that you may hear the prayer of your servant, which I pray before you now, day and night. For the children of Israel, your servants, and confess the sins of the children of Israel, which we have sinned against you. Both my father's house and I have sinned. We have acted very corruptly against you, and have not kept the commandments, the statutes, nor the ordinances which you commanded your servant Moses. Remember, I pray, the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though some of you were cast out to the farthest part of the heavens, yet I will gather them from there and bring them to the place which I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. Notice the simplicity there. If you're unfaithful, I will scatter you. If you return, I will regather you. Yeah, man, a kiddie can understand that. All we need is theologians to confuse the Bible for us. The Bible, generally speaking, is simple and easy to understand. Verse 10, now these are your servants and your people, whom you have redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. O Lord, I pray, please let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who desire to fear your name. And let your servant prosper this day, I pray, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man, for I was the king's cupbearer. The little title that I have put on this is The Birth of a Leader. Did you get that? The birth of a leader. The world is looking for a leader, and we've had a perfect illustration of this in our world today. Can somebody fire out the name to me, please, of a leader who has caught the attention of the world right now as I'm speaking to you? Anybody know his name? Not Putin. He's not a leader. He's a tyrant. Zelensky of Ukraine. Boy, he has given the Russian army quite a mauling in Ukraine under his leadership. And Putin is extremely embarrassed that a former comedian has given him such a mauling in his country. If Putin was a leader, he would have no need to be in Ukraine. The world is looking for a leader. And that's true in the Christian church. The Christian church is looking for a leader. Therefore, I've entitled this, The Birth of a Leader. Boy, if ever there was a day when we need leaders again in the Christian church, it is just simply right now. The birth of a leader. Study Nehemiah if you're thinking of leadership. That raises a little question: who can be a leader? And the simple answer is anybody. Some people are born with natural leadership skills, no doubt about that, but anybody can be a leader. Well, that raises another question. What about the ladies? Now, I haven't looked into where the Congregational Church stands on this, so I may tread on toes, but here you are. When you lift up this book called the Bible, you're going to come across Deborah in the book of Judges, a leader. You're going to come across Miriam, who led the children of Israel out after the crossing of the Red Sea in worship, a leader. Huldah the prophetess, who had a leading role in the restoration during the reign of Josiah, good King Josiah. Esther, we cannot but mention Esther. To this day, the nation of Israel celebrate Esther in the Feast of the Purim. She was a leader. Mary Magdalene, the first to announce the resurrection. Phoebe is mentioned in Romans 16:1 as a deacon. Joel 2, foretelling the outpouring of God's Spirit on all flesh. We read, your sons and your daughters will do what? Does anybody know? Prophesy. Why am I telling that to the ladies this morning? For this simple reason. God may be nudging you to do something and you're holding back because maybe you feel, well, I shouldn't be doing that. Who can be a leader? Anybody, including ladies. But what are the characteristics of a good leader? What should a good leader look like? There's tons of these, and I'll just have to fly through some of them. But here's the first one. Now, you're listening to this. A leader does what others see to do, but don't do. You see, the Jews have been walking through the rubble of these walls, are you listening, for 100 years. That must have crossed somebody's mind somewhere. Listen, boys, we need to rebuild these walls, but nobody did. Nehemiah comes and builds them. Because a good leader does what others see to do, but don't do. Donald Trump is like Marmite, isn't he? You either hate him or you love him. But he's a leader. Obama and Clinton, I'm not sure about Bush, you folks might be able to fill me in on this, they all talked about moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv down to Jerusalem. They all talked about doing it. Vote me in and I'll do that. They talked about it. Donald Trump simply did it. And today the American embassy is in Jerusalem because good leaders do what others see to do but don't do. Secondly, a good leader is a good listener. Look at chapter 5 and verse 1. And there was a great outcry of the people and their wives against their Jewish brethren. Let me throw in a couple of words there to give you context. And there was a great outcry of the poor people and their wives against their rich Jewish brethren. Those few Jews that were rich were extortionate towards their poorer Jewish brothers, if so to speak. And you know what some of them were having to do to make ends meet? They had to sell their own sons and daughters into slavery to make ends meet. Now look at Nehemiah's response to this. Verse 6, 5, 6. And I became very angry when I heard their outcry and these words. Nehemiah is a good listener. Listening is an art that requires attention over talent, spirit over ego, others over self, because listening is one of the loudest forms of kindness. One of the things, if you look into cases of abuse or whatever, and you look into, if you go into YouTube, you know, you can listen to maybe crime stories or abuse stories or all the rest of it, in and out of the church. This stuff is in and it's out of the church. You listen to some of these stories, there's something you're going to discover. Very often the abused, the marginalized are not listened to. What's he going to discover? Nehemiah is a good listener. He listens to the poor people here. And he does something about it, because a good leader is a good listener. Here's a third little thing. A good leader is informed. Look at chapter 3, verse 8. 2, verse 8. Chapter 2, verse 8. He asks for a letter to Asaph. This fella's over the king's forests, and I'm assuming that he's over the king's forest somewhere in the Judean area. This is 800 miles from Shushan. And in Nehemiah's day, that was a 6 weeks to 3 month journey, I suppose, depending how far you can walk each day and how long you can stick it. But Nehemiah knows about him. This fella 800 miles away. Nehemiah knows about him. He's informed. In order to make good decisions, you need as much information as you can gather on the table. That's why you shouldn't rush into decisions. But Nehemiah is informed both in the secular world and the sacred. Nehemiah works in the Persian government. He's a cupbearer to the king. And secondly, notice in chapter 1 there, he asks his brothers how the Jews are back in Jerusalem. He's informed both in the sacred and in the secular. Sometimes the Christian church is good at shooting itself in the foot, and we have an overemphasis on separation. And we separate ourselves and we get into a little corner of our own, and we become less informed. Our information pool decreases. That's a mistake, because a good leader is informed. A good leader doesn't live in an echo chamber. We'll pass on this one. What's an echo chamber? Just listen carefully to this and we'll move on. An echo chamber is an environment in which a person encounters only beliefs or opinions that coincide with their own, so that their existing views are reinforced and alternative ideas are not considered. A good leader doesn't live in an echo chamber. Nehemiah regularly had 150 people at his table. Hard to live in an echo chamber with 150 people around you. A good leader is a visionary. Somewhere between chapter 1, verse 1, chapter 1 and verse 11, Nehemiah gets it into his head, I'm going to go to Jerusalem and rebuild these walls. He's a visionary. The gospel truck that's coming to the town this week, Andrew Maben got the vision for that. He's a visionary. Thank God for it. He's a visionary. This vision of Nehemiah's was personal. But notice, secondly, he imparts it to others. When you go into chapter 3, you'll see this fella builds a part of the wall, another fella builds another part, another fella builds another part, and the whole chapter is a whole list of them. Nehemiah not only has a personal vision, he imparts it to others. And the idea is not that Nehemiah lands in Jerusalem, right, boys, get out there and build a wall. No, Nehemiah imparts the vision to them. They get up themselves, catch the vision, and they build. He imparted it to others. But thirdly, notice, make sure vision is biblical. Now, we all know this verse, Proverbs 29, verse 18. Where there is no vision, the people, what is it? Perish. Have you ever read the whole verse? Let's read the whole thing. Where there is no vision, the people perish, but happy is he who keeps the law. You see, the vision must be biblical. It must fit this book. You see, we have a whole thing in the Christian church where you're encouraged to pursue your vision. Well, you need to make sure that your vision isn't something that you dreamed up after a feed of fish and chips the night before. It needs to be biblical. Make sure your vision is biblical, because if not, that stuff is devastating to the Christian church. A good leader faces difficulty. Nehemiah could have stayed in Shushan, quietly serving the Lord, living in his house, working for the king. Nehemiah is a cupbearer. This is a lucrative job he has. Nehemiah is making money hand over fist. He's raking it in. He's living in a hot country. He could make his existence very, very, very nice. I regularly dream of living in a hot country, I tell you. He could have made his existence lovely. But I want to tell you, when Nehemiah went to Jerusalem to build those walls, he encountered endless difficulties he would have never encountered had he stayed in Shushan. You see, a good leader embraces difficulty. Have you got a little safe house that's keeping you from difficulty? If a young couple came to me and said, look, we feel God is calling us to train in FM college, and after that we want to go out into the work of faith mission, I would be up front with them and I would say to them, look, this is going to bring difficulties into your life you will not have if you stay where you presently are. A good leader faces difficulty. Where will we go next? Yeah, here's one that popped up to me in this. Listen to this one. A good leader is not anti-government. Not anti-government. Nehemiah actually works with the Persian government here. Isn't this interesting, isn't it? Now listen, this is a pagan government. They're a pagan king. This fellow's not influenced at all by the God of the Jews. He's a pagan. Yet Nehemiah works. In fact, it's doubtful Nehemiah could have done what he done if he hadn't had government sanction to rebuild the walls. He's not anti-government. Now, listen, we'll move on. Anti-government people will damage your ministry. Now, we don't let the government walk over us. There's another side to the coin, but you just watch out for anti-government people. A good leader is forward thinking. A good leader is forward thinking. Why forward thinking? Well, if you're not forward thinking, you're going to go back, aren't you? Henry Ford, in 1914, Henry Ford, through his leadership and so forth, had 50% of the market. 50% of automobile sales in the American market. By 1931, it was down to 28%. Do you know why? Henry Ford wouldn't move forward. Henry Ford personally designed and built the Model T Ford. And when his design team brought out an improved version, listen to this now, when his design team brought out an improved version of the Model T Ford, Henry tore the doors off its hinges and he personally wrecked the car with his bare hands. He wouldn't move forward with a newer design. And sales went down to 28%. He wouldn't move forward because a good leader is forward thinking. My cousin of mine did a family tree of my mother's family. My mother was from Monaghan, County Monaghan. And you know, if you do sort of go into your heritage or that, sometimes you discover that some of your relatives were murderers or bank robbers or something like that, you know, and you keep quiet about them. But my cousin anyway, he did a bit of a thing on my mother's family, and he has a little note in about my great-grandfather, that he left the church. Do you know why he left the church? Because they brought an organ into it. Do you know that there was a big hullabaloo when they started bringing organs into the Christian church? A big hullabaloo. And my uncle or great-grandfather wasn't having it, and he left the church. He left it. Now sometimes we hear preachers, don't we, and they talk about going down the old paths again. Oh, we need to go down the old paths. And they're letting you have it about the old paths. I sometimes, when I hear that, I'm sitting there saying to myself, now what are you talking about? I mean, we get the rhetoric, but very often we don't get the specifics. Oh, just what are you on about? If you're talking about prayer, now we'll give you the thumbs up on that. If you're talking about confession where that needs to take place, yes, we'll give you the thumbs up on that. No problem whatsoever. We have it here in Nehemiah, don't we? But let's suppose my great-grandfather was here this morning and he was preaching a great sermon and he started on about getting down the old paths again. Do you know one of the things he's talking about? We'll be getting the organs out of the church. Sorry, Gregory. It has to go. That's the sort of stuff that makes us a laughingstock to the world. And they want nothing to do with us. Those people are crazy. You see, a good leader is forward thinking. David Livingstone said, famous missionary and explorer, I am ready to go anywhere as long as it's forward. Good leader is forward thinking. Here's the last little thing and I'm finished. A good leader is ready to go. Somewhere in between chapter 1 and verse 1 and chapter 1 verse 11, Nehemiah gets into his head, I'm going to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. So look at his prayer in verse 11. Look at what he says. And let your servant prosper this day, I pray, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man, for I was the king's cupbearer. Why is he praying for mercy in sight of the king? Because Nehemiah is saying to God, look, if the king lets me go, I am ready to go. And of course, chapter 2, the king lets him go, authorizes him to go. And Nehemiah is up and he's away. Tell me, are you ready to go for God? You ready to go? Because a good leader is ready to to go.